I want to reference the fact that we are now $18 trillion in debt. I'm not sure that every listener even knows the significance of that. And let me narrow that down just a little bit more and ask, what does it mean to every individual? Let me just play this very short soundbite that talks about this $18 trillion in debt and then get your response.
Aside from the shame of it all, what does an $18 trillion debt mean? One analyst compares it to smoking.
18 trillion isn't a magic number. It's a little bit like one more cigarette won't kill you. But we know if you smoke too many cigarettes, you're more likely to get lung cancer.
When President George W. Bush added more than $4 trillion to the debt, then Senator Obama ripped him for putting so much on the national credit card.
$30,000 for every man, woman, and child. That's irresponsible. It's unpatriotic.
Since then, President Obama has been even more unpatriotic, increasing it another $10 trillion. Most analysts expect annual deficits to level off for a few years, but the $18 trillion debt doesn't include unfunded promises in entitlements such as Medicare, which will explode in a few years.
The total indebtedness of this country is in excess of $60 to $80 trillion. It could even be larger than that.
So when all the baby boomers retire and the bills start coming in, it could get ugly. The nation has made huge promises it has no way of paying, not even with tax increases.
If you calculate the implied tax rates to finance those increases, they would consume most of income.
In fact, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that if no changes are made to entitlements, taxes would have to increase by 48% in 2030 and 86% in 2050. So either benefits would have to be reduced or taxes raised to unsustainable levels.
Because we're simply not going to end up, as the arithmetic suggests, turning our paychecks over to entitlements financing. Basically, we become a government that mails checks to the elderly and has a small army, and that's about it.
Because entitlements, the military, and interest payments of $430 billion a year already will squeeze out all other programs. And the nation needs some flexibility to borrow in case of unforeseen tragedies, such as wars, recessions, and the like.
It's like a homeowner who's way over his credit limit on his credit cards. If his car breaks down and he needs to get it repaired, he can't use his credit card because he's kind of maxed out.
Wessel says we don't know when the U.S. will be maxed out, but we know we're closer than we were 5 years ago.
John Terry, I hear them say that we're not even going to be able to fulfill our promises with tax increases, that taxes may have to increase by 80%, that this does not even include unfunded liabilities such as Medicare, that we're looking at really probably 80 to even $100 trillion in debt. This almost sounds like Nazi Germany. At least it needs some solutions that were offered back in Nazi Germany when everybody just turned their paycheck over to the government. What does this mean to my average listener?
Jan, if we hear this number 18 trillion, and that's a number for most people that's just not a fathomable number. We can't think in numbers that big. If we break it down to $18 trillion in debt, that means to pay the debt off that every citizen of the United States would have to stroke a check in taxes somewhere between $56,000 and $60,000 per person just to take care of the national debt. If we think of the unfunded liabilities, Medicare and some of the other trust fund obligations that we have, to be able to pay that debt off today, not counting what we're continuing to add, that's $185,000 to $190,000 per person. What we have done is we have robbed the future from our children, from our grandchildren, and from our great-grandchildren. And as an economy, if we're having to put all of our money back into entitlement programs, back into the military, and paying debt for money that we borrowed and spent that we should not have borrowed and spent, we have no ability to maintain the infrastructure, roads and bridges, and other things that we need to provide a mechanism for economy to prosper in our country. So the long-term implications are a standard of living that is far less than what we enjoy today.
Yeah. Again, I don't know that there's a solution to this. Government is certainly imperfect. We certainly long for the perfect government with Jesus ruling out of Jerusalem, but that's not here yet. And I think listeners are wondering, what can they do to alter this scenario? And I'm not sure that there's an answer to that.
You know, it comes back to holding the people in government accountable.
That's right.
Really failed to do as as citizens in a country, and we elect people, they go to Washington, they get involved in this culture that's there, and they lose sight, kind of like the Washington, D.C. has a curtain around it, and they don't see the reality of what's going on in the rest of the world, and they focus on their own political ideologies and their own agendas and taking care of themselves, and the rank-and-file citizen in the United States doesn't really get the representation they deserve.
John, 10,000 people a day turning 65. Those are some baby boomers, and that's staggering. This affects the economy. They may spend up to 25 years in retirement. Healthcare, we can talk about that a little bit later. We're not sure where that's going, because if a rationing of healthcare comes along, which I think is absolutely inevitable, that doesn't bode well for our senior citizens. But you said to me that long-term care can cost almost $90,000 a year. What kind of advice do you give to my senior citizens who are listening?
Jan, one of the biggest areas that I have of concern for the boomer populace, and I'm on the tail end of that, as we look at statistics that are out there, 7 out of 10 people 65 and older are going to experience a chronic health care event that's going to require that they need some form of long-term care assistance. And for your listeners that may not know what that is somebody that can come in and help dress you, help you get out of the bed in the morning, move up and down in your house, and be able to provide services because your body breaks down and your health dies before you physically die. The cost of this is staggering. You mentioned the number $87,000 a year. That's the current cost for long-term care in a facility in the United States. That cost is rising at a rate of almost 6% a year. It is in my opinion, the number one cause of premature impoverishment in retirement, in the fact that as people are retiring today, they have failed to look at and address and come up with plans for this uncertainty. So as I'm talking to advisors, and I'm training advisors that work in the senior market, and I'm working with clientele that I work with, and we have conversations about what the next, and my reality for them is you're going to spend up to a third of your lifetime in retirement. How do we address and make sure that we have dealt with this issue? There's really 3 ways to pay for long-term care. Number 1, you can self-insure, which means you're going to write the check if you get sick. Number 2, you can rely on the government to pay for your long-term care, but the government only pays for your long-term care after you've had to sell everything you've spent your lifetime accumulating. Only then, when you're impoverished, will the government step in and they will pay for care. And then there's issues there of the availability of beds and resources, given the vast number of people that are going to be needing services in the future. Or the third way is to transfer that risk to insurance and allow an insurance company to be able to provide benefits for you in the event you have a chronic health care event. Those are your 3 solutions.